and I went to high school and all that stuff, and then I enlisted in the Army when I was 17, and I joined when I was 18, and I was in the States for about a year, bouncing between basic training, AIT, and airborne school, and RIP and all that stuff, and then I ended up coming to Italy to the 173rd, and that was the beginning of 2006, around February. And I was with the unit several months before they came back from OEF 6, and I was in the rear for the duration up till OEF 8. I deployed for those 15 months in the Korengal Valley with the 173rd and with Battle Company. We were stationed out at Firebase Vegas with the rest of my platoon, and I was out there I did those 15 months there in the valley, then we came back. I was in the rear for about another 15 months, and then now I'm in OEF 10, so.
What your rank was back in 07 when you first deployed?
2007, I was a PFC.
PFC at the time. Okay.
Yes, I was a PFC at that time,
Right.
During 2007.
Okay.
Because I wasn't promoted until November, and that was after Rock Avalanche.
Okay, right. So why you got promoted while you're out there then?
Right, I got promoted while I was at Firebase Vegas, yes.
So I just want to kind of hear what you went through, what you saw that night.
The night on Rock Avalanche, it was it would have been the 25th, because it was getting late. I don't remember the exact time, but it was dark, and we were getting ready. We were all set. We were sitting down in another platoon's AO during this operation, and we were sitting up there all day, and we were breaking down to move back, and there was pretty much only one way off that hill, and that was through a choke point where it got real narrow. And that night there was real high loom. I was probably in the 90s, if not 100%. It was high loom that you didn't need night vision to see. And we all got into a file and we started exfilling. And that was when we took contact. And based on where we could tell, it was L-shaped ambush for sure, because it hit us from the high ground in front of us. It hit us on the low ground on both sides of us on the low ground as well. So it was close, within 50 meters of our element. And I was the seventh or eighth guy behind. At that time, I was the RTO, or the radio telephone operator, and I was behind my lieutenant. There was first squad in front of us, which on point was Sergeant Brennan, and then behind him was Eckroad, and then Sergeant Giunta, or Sergeant G, and then it was Clary, and then behind him was Casey, and then it was my LT, and then it was me. So I would have been the eighth guy in the order movement. And when that happened, when the contact went off, my LT and I immediately, we found cover and we got low. And then there shortly after, they told us that Brennan was hit. So me and the LT picked up, still under fire, picked up and ran to the front of the element, and we saw that Brennan had been hit. I did not see Sergeant Gallardo or Sergeant Giunta up there at that time. All I saw was I saw Casey giving first aid to Sergeant Eckroad on his on a wound he took on his leg, and then we heard that Specialist Mendoza was hit, and he was our medic. And so me and the LT went back to where we were before, because the medic was behind us, and we went back to where he was before. He was trying to run up front to get to where Sergeant Brennan was. And me and the LT and I went back to where he was at, and we saw that he had been hit. And one of the weapons squad leaders and I believe the FO were both doing first aid on him. And I could tell he was hitting the leg and the femoral artery, and he was losing a lot of blood. And then they came over, and we were down there for about a minute, and then we heard come over the net again. Like I'm monitoring the company net the whole time. And we heard that they got one of the Taliban guys that hit us, and so we went back up front again to the up front, and that's when I saw Sergeant Giunta and Sergeant Gallardo. They were up front. They were with Sergeant Brennan at that time. They were up there. They were helping him. Looked like they were helping him administer first aid and stuff, and they were talking to him and reassuring him and stuff. My LT went ahead and stayed up front. By then, the fire that we've been taking had slowed down drastically. At that point, I told my LT I was going to go back to Mendoza and help them administer first aid on him. So I went back to where Specialist Mendoza was at, and at that time was Sergeant Gang, or one of the weapons team leaders. And I helped them administer first aid on him until he was gone. And then once Gangwar picked up his body and moved him, then I went back to the front of the formation where my LT was, and I continued. And that's when I continued to send up situational reports and keeping him updated on what the commander wanted and the commander's intent and everything was that night during that operation. Shortly thereafter, the birds came in and picked up Sergeant Brennan and Specialist Mendoza, and shortly thereafter, one of our other platoons who was almost on that same spur with us at that same time. They were it's a couple hundred meters away from us. They ended up linking back up with us, and shortly after, and we continued our exfil back to the COP, the Corn Call outpost, where, after that concluded the rest of the mission for that night, for the most part. But I don't know, that was a very eventful evening, put it that way. A lot of stuff happened. That whole time out, me and my lieutenant were running back and forth. We were taking RPG and small arms fire the entire time. Him and I were one of the only couple of people that were still up running around the whole time during all that. But I still remembered some things very vividly and very clearly.
How far was the distance that you guys were running back and forth from Mendoza?
Between, say, about 100 meters. A little more. We were spread out, yeah. We were within 5 to 10 meters. Each person was within 5 or 10 meters apart from each other. So, yeah, we were running probably 100 meters, maybe a little more, between the front of our element and back into the middle where we were at before. So.
And you didn't get hit at all?
No, my LT and I were the fortunate people that were not hit during all that. Like I said, we're taking small arms fire, and there's RPGs blowing up around us, and I have no clue how the hell him and I were silhouetted on that hill too, and I have no clue how him and I weren't hit. But just lucky we weren't. But I know some people weren't lucky that night that happened. So.
Have you guys ever gotten into it like you did that night?
Not that close. There were a couple of other definitely close calls like that between the enemy where they actually had us pinned down and actually had pretty, that their rounds were definitely well-aimed shots. They actually knew what they were doing. They had us a couple times where, our cover was destroyed because our rounds were impacted. I don't know if they were in close proximity or because their weapons may actually been zero a little better, but there's a couple of times where they were pretty good shots, and they actually had us pinned down or we couldn't move or do anything. There were several other times prior to that night that there were close calls. Besides that, one of those Sergeant Brennan was hit on before when he was hitting the calf. He's hitting one of the legs and again, we were operating another platoon's AO, and enemy had us pinned down behind some rocks, and Sergeant Brennan was hit. He was hitting the leg, and he actually ended up. We were up there with the JTAC. They were there for some Air Force guys, some engineers and stuff, and he actually ended up leading that patrol back off that mountain because, he was a pretty tough guy, and he was shot that day, and he walked down off that mountain, and then he ended up leading the patrol back off, and then they ended up ended up Kazavacking him later. So, but yeah, it was pretty crazy. That was another time that was pretty close. We have other times in our AO where we've been operating in that they were either snipers or they'd actually have several guys, and they were actually able to pin us down, and we weren't able to do a whole lot of effective fire back on them, but theirs is definitely effective. But yeah, we were in close calls before that, so in a way when that night that happened wasn't really a surprise as far as close contact came. That was the closest ever that they've actually came to proximity to us, distance-wise, as far as personnel is concerned. But as far as contact-wise, that was no shock. That's why that night everybody pretty much stayed calm, and they knew what they were doing. They knew what was going on. No one freaked out. I mean, leaders had total control over their men, and the men knew what was going on. There wasn't a whole lot that my platoon sergeant or my PL couldn't handle. That, it was all. I think the situation was handled very well that evening, considering the events that happened and considering the unnumbered amount of odds that was stacked against us that night. Because they definitely had the high ground, and they had us beat on that night on that hill that we were on. They definitely had the beat on us that night.
Definitely a dangerous area.
Oh yeah, and we knew that too, based on it. And then one of the reasons we stayed up there that late was we were waiting on air assets to come in, and it's one of the reasons why we stayed up there. And then the air assets took longer than it was expected, and by then it was dark. And then we exfilled when it was dark. We were up there all day. The enemy had all day to move in, so it wasn't. When they hit us, we were like, yeah. I mean, it was almost like it was expected, just because we were there all day, and that's just one of those things.
Were you around or up in the front area when Sergeant Giunta ran up to get Josh?
When I ran up front, like I said earlier before, I did not see Sergeant Giunta or Sergeant Gallardo. They were already gone. And I was asking. They said that they took off. That Sergeant Giunta took off. So I'm assuming. First thing that went to my head was, why the hell would he take off by himself without a fire team? Usually, I mean, that's not something somebody does. And usually, you always wait. You consolidate. You reload ammo. You come up with battle strategy, plan something, and then you roll back out with at least a fire team at the minimum. And I went up there, and he was gone. He wasn't anywhere. They told me that he ran after the guy. And like I said, that's when me and the LT went back to where Mendoza was, and that's when we heard that they actually killed one of them, one of the Taliban. That's when we went back up front again, and he was meters wide. I don't know. He's away from our element, still in front of our element, where they had killed where they had the KIA, the enemy KIA. And I went up front, and that's when my LT and I saw that Sergeant Giunta had got one of their guys. And then at that time, that's when I saw that. When I went back up front, that's when I saw that Sergeant Giunta and Sergeant Gallardo were both back there again. But see up front, I did not see either one of them. And they told me that Sergeant Giunta took off, so I didn't know where he went. I didn't know why he went. I didn't know what the hell he was doing, but it just told me that he just left. Cause I asked Specialist Clary where he went. He's like, Sergeant Sal took off. He's gone. Where the hell did he go? And he ran off after him. After the guy that shot Brennan. And I was just like, so I was not gonna figure that he went up there on his own. I actually thought, I sat there for a while that maybe they actually would have been gotten Sergeant Giunta as well, because he's out there by himself, and I knew that there were several fighters really close to us, and I was afraid they were getting him too as well. But no, he came back, and I think they said he ended up getting back some of his stuff too. Well, maybe what they did is prevented him from dragging off Sergeant Brennan. I think I definitely needed Brennan, because that's what they tried doing. That's one reason why he went after him. Because I talked to him later that night when we got back to the cop. And I noticed that he had his armor and stuff had been hit. They'd shot him too. So, but it's about, as far as me able to see exactly what he did, I was not up front, so I cannot say for certain what I know why he did it, but I can't say. I didn't actually see it from my own eyes of him leaving or any of those guys up front. I did not see. Those three particularly, I didn't have eyes on. I had eyes on. I could see Clary and Casey, but I cannot see Sergeant Gallardo or Sergeant Giunta or Sergeant Brennan. Those 3 people I couldn't see. Or Sergeant Eckroyd.
Hearing the stories afterwards of what he did, what kind of came to your mind? What did you think about after you actually heard the story? What he did, basically ran out.
Right. I thought that was one of the craziest fucking things I ever heard. I was like, to me at the time when they told me that he's like he ran out there and ran after him, I was like, that made no sense to me. I was like, it made no sense. I was like, that's got to be crazy. That guy's got to be insane to do something like that. But after they told me why he did it, it definitely made more sense. And then I definitely knew that it wasn't something he just did just because he was crazy or it was just, spur of the moment kind of thing. It was, they were taking on, they were trying to grab his friend, and he ran out there and he went after him. And it made perfect sense why he did that. And after that, I realized, okay, that wasn't something you crazily just did, and it was something that he had reason to do it. And after that, I had a lot more respect for him. I had no idea that he would have done something like that to try to save a friend. But I definitely respect him more as a person and as a soldier based off that night and after he did that, because especially alone by himself, I don't know anybody doing that on their own. Now with fighters still that close on the ground, still shooting at you, that's because they were still taking fire at that time. I know he works, it never stopped. And when I went up front, he wasn't up there, he was still out there somewhere. So it's an amazing thing for a person to pull off by themselves. So I definitely a lot of respect for the guy now, a lot more based off after that.